Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is episode number 15. My name is John Sanders. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show. And can I just tell you before we get going today how grateful we are to have you watching or listening to our show every single week. We hope you find really valuable content here that helps you in your journey to become an entrepreneurial pastor. Guys, today's show, we're titling this one, Marketing Your Message, and we have an incredible guest. His name is Ray Edwards. If you've never heard of Ray, man, you're in for a treat today. This guy is a genius when it comes to copywriting and putting your message into words in such a way that causes other people to lean in and want to do business with you. A while back, Les had the privilege to sit down with Ray for this interview, and I know you're going to be blessed by it. So without any further ado, let's get to this interview with Ray Edwards. Check this out.
Ray Edwards, welcome to the EntrePastors podcast, my friend.
Les, it is an honor and a privilege. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's great to see you. And, full transparency here, everybody. Ray Edwards is not only a good friend, but he's my business coach, my platform coach, one of my mentors. And I think the world of this man. And so I'm going to do what I can to be objective here, Ray, but I'm not by any means,
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate those kind words. And we do have a special connection. We go back quite a ways, and it's always fun to get back together and talk about the journey we've been on and where we're headed next.
Well, and for all of our listeners, one of the reasons that I was drawn to Ray to begin with is he's a brother in Christ. And there are a lot of voices out there, but he got my attention real quickly because he spoke the same language as I did, sort of. I mean, a little different, but sort of the same language as I did, because we literally, we kind of come from a similar place. We're both natives of Kentucky, even though, Ray, you've relocated now and are out on the west side of the nation, but I still feel like we kind of share that in common.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're always from Kentucky.
That's it.
It doesn't matter where you go, you're always from Kentucky.
We can watch the series Justified in a way that nobody else can.
Amen to that.
All right. So for people, I want to introduce what you do and kind of a little bit of who you are, Ray, to our listeners. Some of them are going to full well know who you are because they're in the space that we're going to be talking about. Others may not. So for those who don't, I want to share it this way. You won't say this, so I will. Everybody, Ray Edwards is one of the best in the world at his craft. So at what he does. Now, Ray, if you would share some of what you do, and then we'll dive a little deeper.
Well, I'm probably best known to most people as a copywriter, the person who writes the words that sells your products, services, books, ideas, beliefs, etc. So I write sales copy and marketing copy, and also as a marketing and communications coach. And I've had the privilege of working with people like Jack Canfield and Michael Hyatt and Jeff Walker and Tony Robbins, and you probably know some of those names. Mm-hmm. Mark Victor Hansen. The Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen are the two guys who put together the Chicken Soup for the Soul empire, just to give you an idea. And then thousands of entrepreneurs who have everyday businesses you may not have heard of. But I basically help people say the words that convey the value they offer to the marketplace and sell their products and services without feeling salesy or pushy is the idea. Mm-hmm. And that's, in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Which is basically everything. So yes. We're faced with copy every place we turn. Every time we turn on the television, every time we see a billboard, every time we get an email that's part of some sort of sales funnel, anything like that, any advertising, we're exposed to copy, right? No pun intended.
Yeah. Exactly. Some people get confused. They hear copyright and they think the little C inside the circle that protects people from stealing my book manuscript. That's a different thing. That's protecting your intellectual property rights. Copywriting that's WRITING, is writing the words that sell. And in today's environment, more than ever, it's always been true, but in today's environment, there's more places for the copy to go. Everything is copy. When you communicate, the words that you speak and the tonality you use when you speak them, I can be very excited about what I'm talking about, or I can be very slowed down and more thoughtful. And that can be conveyed through the tone of my voice or through the words that I use or the pacing or the length of the sentences. It's an art, a craft, and a science to communicate in a way that persuades and influences. And people say, well, I don't use sales copy. Well, yes, you do, because if you have a blog where you maybe write out, if you're a pastor, you may put the text of your sermon on your blog or on your website. That is sales, because you're selling people on an idea. You're selling them on a lesson you're teaching them from the scripture. That is selling. Selling is simply getting somebody to say, yes, I agree. I buy that. I buy that idea. I buy that lesson. I buy that principle. I buy that book, that product, that car. We're always selling something. A sale is always being made. Either I'm selling you on my point of view, or you're selling me on your point of view. And almost every conversation, even if we're talking about where we go get coffee, I may want to go to a coffee shop that is kind of a artisan coffee shop. You might want to go to McDonald's or to Starbucks. So you're always selling something. And so what I try to convey to people is, even if you don't think of yourself as a salesperson, if you have a business or you have a church, you're selling people on the idea, come visit our church, come be part of our congregation. Mm-hmm. That's selling an idea to them that maybe they want to try to do that and see what that's all about. So the way you communicate is vitally important. The words you use and the way you put them together and when you deliver those words is vitally important. So I just encourage people to think more about what they're communicating, to whom, and for what purpose.
That is awesome, and I've seen that to be true. Absolutely, as I've seen more about what it means to be a copywriter, and even gone through some of the training to pay attention to words and how they're put down in print where people see them. So I also know we're of course on video as well. So I just saw you pick up your Revel coffee cup, speaking of coffee shops, and take a swig. So I'd like for you just to talk about this economy that we're in, that's probably going to be here for the rest of our lifetimes, where the old model, and this includes the church, certainly, the old model of having a paycheck and being able to kind of count on that paycheck for 30 or 35 years, that's gone. And so you yourself have even leaned into that truth, where you not only have a platform online, but now you are invested in at least a bricks and mortar place called Revel. And I've partaken myself, and it's very, very good. So there you go.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, it is a brave new world, and people talk about, when are we going back to normal, or is this the new normal? It's not the new normal. It's just normal. Look through history. Things have always changed. If there's one thing we can be certain of, it's uncertainty. We don't know what's coming. We think that tomorrow's going to be like yesterday, and that's almost never true. It's true a few days in a row, and you might be looking at a certain, like 100 years, or it might be 5 years or 10 years or 10 days. People who build digital businesses, for instance, on platforms like social media, there are many people who have a business that's built solely on Facebook and Instagram. Well, this past week, for 6 hours or so, Facebook and Instagram were offline. And suddenly those people had no business. And they realized, oh, gosh, maybe I should have a website. Maybe I should have an email list. Maybe I should have my customers' contact information. Because otherwise, if Facebook or Instagram go down, or they decide to take me off the platform, my business is gone. It's not to say we don't want to use these platforms for our benefit and for the benefit of others. It is saying we have to think about, I believe, taking more responsibility for how we engage with the world in terms of our churches and our businesses and our activities and our communications. And that means, I think, diversifying. We have a bricks and mortar coffee shop that for many months during the recent unpleasantness was not able to have people come inside to buy coffee. We don't have a drive-through. So what do? We had to pivot. We had to change our approach. We prepared coffee and took it out to the curbside. And we did that. We never stopped. We never shut down during the whole thing. And our plan is for that to continue to be the case. Of course, as we know, the government can just step in and say, nope, you're closed regardless. That can happen as well. Yeah. So that creates a lot of uncertainty for people. But my belief is there's always a way to survive, and not just survive, but to thrive. There's always a way if you apply yourself to thinking about what that way is and not giving up. And if there's not a way, there's a reason for what you're going through, and going through it instead of trying to go around it or under it or in the other direction, but pressing on toward your destination, your goal, and going through the challenge that you're going through right now. There's a purpose behind it. And, the Bible promises, Jesus said, in this world, you'll have trouble, but take courage because I've overcome the world. So to me, that's an admonition that we don't necessarily get to always avoid the unpleasant things that happen. And we need to press through them because there's something more on the other side. So that's my approach. And a huge part of that is about communicating. It's communicating not only our sales message, but it's communicating our heart. And part of the reason for Revel 77's continued success as a coffee shop in a time when many local coffee shops here in our town shut down totally forever. They're gone. Why do we survive? One reason is we kept staying open because we were dedicated to the customers. We wanted them to have some semblance of something normal in their life, something they could count on from their previous life that made them feel like, okay, there's hope. Not everything is falling apart. I can still get a good cup of coffee. And it may sound like a small thing, but the commitment to the customer or to the parishioner or to the member of your church or a small group or whatever you may do is important. They need to know you care about them. And how do you let them know that? You communicate with them in words and in your presence.
Well, then this is where, don't you think the world of entrepreneurship kind of crosses over into ministry as well? Because when things change, if that's our calling, and you can speak to that if you'd like about what you do being a calling, because it absolutely is. And so when you have a calling on your life, there's giving up and stopping is not an option. You just had to figure out how that is. I'll also plug the your podcast while I'm at it for a reason. So if anybody wants to listen to Ray on a weekly consistent basis, it's the Ray Edwards Show. That's his podcast, the Ray Edwards Show. He drops a new episode every single Monday without fail. And so you tune into that. It's diverse, it's creative, it's very, very informative, and you'll be blessed by that. So the reason I'm saying that, Ray, is that I remember during all of that craziness, you were sharing some of the creative things that you all were needing to do to keep Revel 77 open. And I just remember thinking, well, man, that is so creative. And how did he come up with that idea? And you're a creative guy, but my guess would be that it would be part of, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. And I know that you've got other people, your son being one of them, that are speaking into that world.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm not as creative as I am a great hoarder of information and ideas. I read all kinds of books. I listen to lots of podcasts. I read articles, blogs. I watch certain YouTube channels and videos, and I'm always looking for the new, interesting, fascinating idea about how to communicate, how to market. And I really love business. I love building businesses. I do look at it as a calling. I believe that, not everybody's called to be a pastor of a church, but many people are, and many pastors are called to be, I would think of them more as tent-making pastors. They have a business that they operate, and they pastor the church because that's the office they were called to in the church itself. So they go and occupy that position as the pastor of the church, but they make their living, perhaps, not in all cases. I'm not prescribing any one course and saying this is the right way for everybody to do it, but some people are called to have a business and also be a pastor. And some people are a pastor within their business and vice versa.
Yep.
So it's knowing what you're called to. And some people say, well, how do I know what my calling is? A big clue is it something you deeply want to do? And is it in alignment with God's word and God's will? Now, if it's not in alignment with God's word and God's will, then clearly that's not your calling. You're receiving a call from a wrong number. You should hang up on that call. But when it fits God's word and it fits God's will, and you deeply desire to do it, and you always have in some form, fashion, or other. Like I've been a writer ever since I learned how to write. I know that my calling is to write for the glory of God, for the kingdom of God. And that can take many different forms. And I think God gives us the leeway to find the path that fits our own unique makeup that he created in the best way possible. So whatever your job may be, you may be an insurance agent, you may be a real estate agent, you may be a pastor of a church, and that's your solitary vocation. Or maybe you're a tent maker, you have a business and you use that to support your pastoral work. But knowing your calling and then doing everything, as the Bible says, as if you're doing it unto the Lord. Do your work as unto the Lord.
That's right.
How would God have me do this work that I do? What if I'm a doctor, if I'm an insurance agent, if I'm a lawyer, a real estate agent, whatever you're doing, if you run a coffee shop, if you're a barista, how would God have you be a barista? We need baristas. We need people to make sandwiches in restaurants. And I'd love it for them to be godly people who follow God's word and God's will.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. No doubt. So you're in a part of the country, to dovetail into that, you're in a part of the country that would be considered by a lot of evangelicals as pioneer country, a lot of church planning still out your way. And my guess would be that you're seeing pastors have to come up with different models for their livelihood, because churches, a lot of those churches out that way, church planners go into it with a co-vocational or a bivocational mindset, or, hey, I want to establish a business as a coffee shop, and by the way, we're gonna meet as a gathering of the church in here on the Lord's Day. So I know you coach and you mentor a lot of pastors in the business world as well. So what are some of those models or examples, or maybe an example or two of somebody that's doing that you can share with our listeners?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. We just had a pastor join our coaching program about a year ago who was, they were deemed by I have to be careful how I say this. They were deemed by the church they were working with as being not productive enough and not focused enough on the church, even though they weren't being paid very much money at all. And they were being given a place to live and a car to drive. And so there were some benefits that kind of were like those golden or silver handcuffs that made it hard to walk away from. Mm-hmm. But they knew in their heart they needed to do that. So they took their love of writing to become a copywriter and develop that into a real lucrative business. But they're still a pastor, still ministering to people, still very much involved in the work of Jesus Christ on the earth. And so they haven't stopped being a minister of the gospel. They stopped being employed by a church as a pastor person, which that's not the one and only way to minister the gospel. I think, as we all know, God doesn't need more pastors and pulpits, I don't believe. I think what he needs is more ministers in the marketplace. And that can take any form you can possibly think of. And I know pastors who there's a couple of great coffee shops I know that are just like what you just described. They were started by pastors, founded by pastors as coffee shops, not as churches, but there is a ministry background to what's happening in the coffee shop. And they also meet with a group of Christians on the Lord's Day every week inside the coffee shop, which is closed for coffee business on that day. So there's no one way to do this. I think to me, the biggest challenge I see pastors have in this realm of entrepreneurship, being an EntrePastor, which I love that term, by the way. What a great, thank you. Great idea. One of the problems that a lot of pastors face is getting through their own mindset about money when it comes to being a pastor. They somehow believe to be a pastor means I have to be poor. I have to be broke. I have to be scrambling for the next dollar. And I often wonder, the people that I encounter who are in that position, they're devoted to the gospel, commendable. It's the highest calling of all. And yet they're broke all the time. They're constantly scrabbling for money to be able to pay rent, have food to eat, to feed their family, take care of their health needs and so forth. And I wonder, what would happen if you made enough money that you didn't have to think about money anymore? I'm not saying you have to be rich. I think there are pastors who are wealthy, who've been called to be wealthy, but that's not their primary driver. That's a different discussion. But I'm just saying, what if you had more than enough money to meet all your family's needs and you didn't have to worry about money? Would you spend less time or more time thinking about money if you had enough? If you have enough and you're not obsessed with wealth for the wrong reasons, then having enough is definitely better than having not enough. I think most of us would agree. So I don't think your spirituality is determined by your bank account. You can have no money and be very spiritual. You can have no money and be very unspiritual, very greedy, very avarice minded, very focused on wealth and the spirit of mammon, and be poor as well as being rich. So it's those two extremes. The poverty mindset and the greed mindset are like the two opposite ends of the pole. But in the center is the proper stewardship of wealth and possessions in God's kingdom for God's purposes. And what if you're a pastor who has that mindset and you operate from that place and you have plenty of money for your family and plenty of money to give, and plenty of money that allows you to focus on your work as a pastor without wondering where the next meal is going to come from.
Exactly. And don't you think that what ministry takes such focus, and there are always needs that, must be met. The job's never really done. If we really have compassion toward people, there are going to be needs, right? So, and don't you think that, although resources are a great tool, they can also be a great distraction when there's a lack of them?
Absolutely. And, it's true that it's better to give than to receive. We read that in the Bible. People often hear that, they hear that, and they also think that you have to give before you can receive. Those are two different ideas. It's become very apparent to me that many of us need to learn how to receive so that we may give. And what I mean by that is there are many people who have the potential to create wealth. The Bible also says God gives us the power to create wealth. And why would he give us the power to do something if he didn't intend for us to use that power wisely under his authority? Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, then don't we have to have a capacity to receive the wealth, the capacity to receive it, to receive abundant reward for our work so that we may give? So it's not a matter of being obsessed with piling up wealth or fame or recognition for the purposes of building up our own little kingdom. That is clearly an error that will lead to bad places. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something we're wise to be careful of, but we also should not be on guard against receiving great abundance financially, especially if we know that what we're doing with that abundance is we're feeding it into God's kingdom. Mm-hmm. And that may mean giving to charity, maybe giving to ministries, giving to charity work. And it may also mean creating jobs and wealth for the people who work for us as our employees.
There you go.
That is also
exactly right.
Also a valid way to create wealth and to steward it well and to put it in the hands of other people by giving them good, productive, wholesome work to do to earn their own income and build their own wealth for their families.
Man, that's so true. And speaking of that, all right, I know you, and I've heard you speak about people in ministry and your own personal pastors. So you have a high regard of people that are in that place of ministry too, the ones that are sitting in that chair. So, but as also a businessman, let me share with you something that I've just witnessed as I've gotten a little bit older, I probably just didn't notice it, didn't pay attention to it as I was younger, but as I've gotten older and spent more time even in the marketplace, what I've noticed, see if you agree with this, is that there's a certain type individual out there, because we're men, a lot of times it's men, but not exclusively, but there's a certain type individual out there who not only may not respect person in ministry that doesn't seem to have a handle on their own finances or doesn't quite understand, how to steward those things and be kind of a conduit of that. So don't you think in many ways that the level of respect or the stock goes up in a person's mind who lives in that world all the time? If they're a follower of Christ, they can still be in that world. And if they see somebody like a pastor or a minister or a missionary that's got those kinds of chops that they can carry their own in the marketplace as well, don't you think their stock goes up?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is a very subtle area to think about, because it's not true that you have to have the higher income to have the respect of an executive. Like, you may have a CEO in your church, in your congregation, who makes $1 million a year. It doesn't mean you have to make 1.5 million in order to have that man's respect or that woman's respect. It does mean that if you cannot live on your income and live below your means and have savings and have financial security for your family and be a good steward of the money you have so that money is not a worry for you. In other words, if you don't have a responsibility, or if you don't have a responsible way of handling your finances, then they're going to have in the back of their mind a little doubt about your competency in other areas of your life, because they're going to say to themselves, maybe not even consciously, but unconsciously, they're thinking, well, this person doesn't seem to have the right amount of self-discipline and forethought and stewardship in their heart that I have for my business, even though they have many less complex responsibilities than I do. They don't run a big $10 million company or whatever the case may be. They're not comparing incomes. They're comparing your ability to steward what you have been given. And so if you can steward it well and responsibly, and you manage the wealth you've been given well, whether it's a small amount or a medium amount or a large amount, you have their respect, because that is a way they measure your ability to function as a human being in this world. if you seem incompetent when it comes to handling or generating money, take care of your family, there's going to be questions in their mind about your competency to guide them spiritually. Mm. And perhaps, now hear me carefully. I'm not saying if you have money problems right now, that means you're not a good person, it means you're not a good Christian. It does not mean that at all. There are circumstances beyond all of our control that happen that put us in those positions. But I'm saying if you have a lifetime pattern of not handling money well, it's something worthy of examination, even within your own self, to say, why is this? What's going on here that I don't seem to be able to master this area of my life? And certainly people who are good at money and finances and handling their own wealth creation and wealth building are having those questions as well. So hear me when I say it, you don't have to be rich to be a good pastor for a rich congregation, but you do, I believe you do owe it to them to handle the money you earn as an income responsibly and to grow it over time. So you have a safety net and emergency fund and you have retirement funds. You just take good care of what you've been given, whatever that amount is, to earn their respect that you know how to use the tools of their trade. So they understand that you can do that responsibly and you have a certain amount of self-discipline. That does win you points of respect where you may not get them otherwise.
So when you have somebody come to you, Ray, that has a ministry background, they might be a pastor in their mid-50s, okay? And for their adult career, that's pretty much what they've done.
Right.
That's their level of, that's their expertise. That's their sweet spot, their comfort zone. But for what could be many reasons, they're needing either some sort of off ramp, or maybe they've been pushed off of a cliff and have had to make a big leap. And either way, when they come to you, I know they do, and say, something's got to give. I'm open. I'm looking. They say, even though it's not true, they say, I don't have any marketable skills. You know, that's the phrase. Again, it's not true, but they don't think they do. Then for people like that are listening to this conversation, where would you tell them to just start? Just to start, and so that they know that they're not alone and they don't have to do it by themselves.
What a great question, because I hear this story and encounter this story so often, because it happens. Pastors need to make a change for one reason or another, and they're convinced they don't have any marketable skills, and they certainly can't do an online business thing because they feel like they know nothing about that. And I have to start by gently reminding them or showing them maybe for the first time the assets they already have at their disposal. They're really good speakers. They know how to speak to a group of people, which for most people in the population is something they don't know how to do. They don't have any experience or very little experience doing. Pastors have plenty of experience doing that. They don't know how to prepare new material once a week for sharing with a group of people. They've done that all their lives. They don't know how to work with people and coach people, but pastors know how to coach people. They've been training for all their career as a pastor, that you coach, you counsel, you connect, you communicate, you speak, you write, you record. Probably you're making recordings of your sermons if you're a pastor, or you have been recordings of past sermons. So all those skills translate into being able to podcast, being able to make YouTube videos, being able to write blog posts or articles, being able to write books that people will pay to read, to buy, to share, being able to create curriculum and courses for online training programs. All those things are skills that are immediately and directly transferable. You've got more practice than most people who are doing well in those fields already. So most of the online coaching experts you see have less experience than you do as a pastor at coaching and teaching and speaking and writing and recording. You have more experience than any of those people already. If you just recognize that you have the skills, you just need to refocus how you're going to use them, and you've got the basis of a strong online business already within you.
Well, since you went there, I'll go ahead and make an admission. And I don't know if I've ever really told you this, Ray, but you probably know it already, so I might as well. And there's somebody that's listening to this that is probably in the same place. When you and I were starting to get to know one another, and you were listening to my background and what I'd done, and I was really asking you and to help me to see some things maybe that I couldn't see, and what your suggestions were. And they were just suggestions. One of the first things you mentioned was coaching. And I can remember, just being honest, I can remember being so deflated at first, because I thought, is that it? I mean, really, all these conversations, all of this time and me sharing, and that's it. I'm thinking, what, not writing, not this, not that, and the other. But can I tell you, you were absolutely right. It was a mindset thing for me. I was telling myself things that just were not true. They were just lies. And now, in addition to other things, I'm certainly doing that. And God has opened up many opportunities to do that, either through one-on-one or mastermind groups, like a lot of us do. So I would say that for anybody out there who's listening and you're having lots of doubts and lots of fears, I would say if your why is strong enough, it'll help you cast all those doubts and fears aside. And this is something that you absolutely can do.
Yeah, for sure. And, for a lot of pastors, I think they hear coaching, they think, oh, I'm so worn down from all the conversations I've had with people about their problems over and over and week after week after week. And one of the key distinctions you need to think about and realize is, first of all, being a professional coach in the world of business pays a lot better than the quote coaching you did as a pastor. I'm not saying it's more valuable or less valuable. I'm just saying that business people understand they're having you coach them because they need help with their confidence, with their vision, with their belief, with their communication skills, whatever you may coach them about. And they understand that there's a monetizable value they can put on the worth of the improvements you can help them make. And so they'll pay for it. So a lot of pastors can't believe when I tell them, well, I know coaches who make $2,000 a month coaching people, 2 calls a month, $2,000, $1,000 a call. And the usual reaction is, nobody will pay that kind of money. Yes.
Oh yeah, they do.
They do for sure.
They sure
and
do.
On top of that, coaching is not the only way. It's just one very high profit way to monetize your skills in a very honorable way. You're not deceiving anybody. You're not doing something that you should be doing for free. This is a business transaction that has real worth and value to your clients and customers as a coach. But you can also, if you say, I just don't want to do coaching, that's also an option because you're a writer. If you're a pastor, you're a writer and you can write. I just did a podcast, episode number 537, I think is the episode number. It's about writing as a business, and you can write a book. You can write a short manual, a how-to guide. Maybe it's a how-to guide on how to have better relationships, how to have better marriage, how to improve your marriage, how to improve your communication with your employees, whatever skills that you know how to teach people. You probably know, as a pastor, you probably know dozens and dozens of these little areas of knowledge about how to function better in this part of your life or your society or your business or your responsibilities. So you write a little how-to manual you can sell for, believe it or not, if you can write a book, think about it this way. If you could write a short how-to manual, 50 to 100 pages on how to save your marriage from divorce. If somebody really believed it would do that, would they pay $50 for it? You might say, no, they never would. They do over and over and over again. We know it for a fact. We can document it. Thousands of books, PDF books, booklets, the same kind of thing you would create if you had like a 5 or 6 week series of sermons and you just wrote them up and you made the notes for the sermon that people could fill in the blanks, and you made questions and answers, discussion group questions. That's enough to put into a small book like I just talked about and sell it for $50 in the open marketplace. Then it doesn't have to be the church marketplace. It could be just the regular marketplace, or it could be to Christians. What they want is not the number of pages in the book. That's not what they're after. They're after the result you can bring them. If you can save their marriage from divorce, they'll pay $50 for that. No problem.
Yes. Yeah.
Looking for searching for it. And so I just real quickly want to walk you through this model.
Yeah.
If you could write a 50 to 100 page book in a week, which as a pastor, you can, because if you take your sermons and you take 3 or 4 of your sermons and you record them and have them transcribed, that's 50 to 100 pages right there. Mm-hmm. And you do that month after month after month. You probably do, 25, anywhere from 100 to 200 pages worth of copy per month if you just had your sermons transcribed. Just think about that for a moment. Mm-hmm. So now you take that, you write 1 book a month and you sell it for $50 and you have 12 books at the end of a year. Just pretend. I know it doesn't work out that neatly. You may only have 6 books. You may have 8. Let's say you have 12 and you just you sell 25 copies of your 1 book in a month. Out of the world of 8 billion people, if you could get in front of just a few people every week, do you think you could sell 25 copies of that book? Is it possible? You don't know how to do it right now, I'm sure. But I can tell you that's a very modest ambition of selling 25 books a week, or a month, 25 books a month. Absolutely, you can do that. Mm-hmm. If you do that 25 times in a month, and you sell it for $50, that comes out to, I think, $1,250 for 1 book.
Yep.
$1,250 per month for one book. For 12 books, once you add in the incremental increase each month, it's over $200,000 just selling those books online, which is very doable. People say, well, you have to have video courses. You have to do mastermind groups. You don't have to do those things. If you just want to make $100,000 or $120,000 a year, which would be life-changing money for most pastors, you could do that strictly by writing, just by what I just talked about. You don't have to go speak on big stages. You don't have to do a bunch of big salesmanship webinars. You don't have to do a bunch of live video streams. You don't have to do a whole lot of social media. You can do all those things and help sell more books, but you don't have to. You just write the books and market them in a very simple way and make a six-figure income just by writing things you already know about. Because you're a pastor, you've learned so many valuable life skills that are transferable to the marketplace. You can make a six-figure income just by writing alone.
Okay, if you're listening to this, I'm going to ask you to do something, all right? Do yourself a favor. If you're walking in the morning or you're on a treadmill or you're driving and you can't write anything down, look at the clock on your phone right now to where it is, and then just mark it in your mind. And when you settle somewhere, go back 5 minutes and you need to listen to that again, what Ray just said, and do the math. Just take some notes and do the math, and hopefully it will open up your eyes the way that it did my own. I remember where I was sitting and where I was when we began talking about this subject, and we were at a conference table, and there were a few members of a mastermind around that table talking to Ray, and I began sharing with him how many sermons I had preached per week for how many years. And he said, would you repeat that? And so I did. He picked up his phone and he went to his calculator and he punched it a few times. And then he turned the screen around to me and he showed me potentially how many books that translated into. And it was dozens of books. And my jaw dropped, and everybody else's around that table of that conference table did as well, because I just had not thought of it that way. I had no idea. But that's just one example of what you're sitting on top of. If you desire this, if you want to go down this path.
Imagine the freedom. If you still want to be a pastor, but you don't want to depend on the paycheck from the church or donations or having to have a second job or third job to pay your bills, imagine the freedom of having a business that produced $120,000 a year as just an example income. So you didn't have to, for many pastors, that would pay all their bills and give them plenty of money left over to save and to give. More than enough. If you make 120 and you lead a $90,000 lifestyle, you're set. Mm-hmm. Imagine the freedom you have to do the work of the gospel without worrying about money now. There's no more money worries. There's no more tension between you and your spouse. And there's no more fear and stress and anxiety about those things. Imagine how that would transform your life.
Not only that, Ray, you're absolutely right. It is transformational. And I didn't anticipate this next part as much, but we're seeing it every single week, because John Sanders and I are having a lot of conversations now about people that are in this world. And I've already lost count how many people we've had tell us that are pastors' kids or missionary kids. You know, John's dad was a pastor for a season. My dad was a minister as well. He was a pastor. And even when God provides, there are just the memories that so many pastors' kids or missionaries' kids or ministers' kids have of some manifestation of scarcity in their lives. It's really a struggle for many of them. That's what they remember, and they remember their mom and their dad being devoted to that congregation and that fellowship, and not complaining or whining. But they remember so many things that they had to say no to. Not because the parents might not have wanted to provide it, just because it wasn't a reality for them. The resources just weren't there.
Yeah. And that takes the form. Some people may roll their eyes when I say this, but it's true. For a lot of those pastors' kids and spouses and families, it takes the form of actual psychological trauma in their life. Trauma is about not feeling safe because of something that happened earlier in your life. You build an association that I'm not safe, I'm not protected. And so many people have this around money and wealth and security and safety. And it's a real issue. It's a real problem. And I'm not saying, please hear my heart and hear my words. I'm not saying that sometimes we are not each of us, if not all of us, many of us are often called into situations in life by God. He allows things to unfold in our lives that challenge us in this area. We may be in a place of poverty, actual poverty for a season of life. And God's thoughts are higher than my thoughts. I don't know why that must happen for some people and not for others. He may call us into a ministry that takes us to the poorest places on earth. Most of us are not called to that. Most of us are called where we are right now. And in America, in the Western world, in most of the developed world, we have to remember that the ability to create a financial base that covers all of our needs and leaves more than enough is within the grasp of most everybody who will strive and work diligently to make that happen. So think about that. Think about, is it God's call for you to have that available to you as a resource and then not take advantage of it, or to misuse it so that you're deeply in debt and you can't pay your bills and you're always broke? Or does he call you to build on that base and build a firm financial base for you and your family, and instill in his children and your children the idea, the belief that you can be safe, you can be protected, you can do the work of God, and prospering is not a sin, but it's a way to have resources from which to give. And I think about the lessons we're teaching our children. If we show them that you can create wealth and have plenty of money to take care of the needs of your family and to give generously and to have something saved back for emergencies and not worship the money, but also teach them at the same time, if you work diligently according to God's word, you don't have to worry about not being safe in this world. I'm not saying that it'll always protect you, because it won't. That makes it into an idol. But I'm saying that if we're in a position like most of us are who are listening to this podcast where we have the ability to do that, by not doing it, are we doing God's will, or are we working against it?
You know, in some ways, we've only scratched the surface, but my sense is that we can wrap it up there, I think. So before we do, there are so many ways that people can get more if they desire from really the things that you shared, and so much more. I'm so grateful, Ray, for you. I'm grateful to God for bringing you into my life. And I know that there are many days, Lord willing, many days like this ahead. What I'd like for you to share, if you would, is you're also a best-selling author. You have live events around the country that people can go to if they so choose. So what's the best way for people to first of all, let us know what the kind of the low-hanging fruit is for you these days, because you've always sort of you're on the way to doing something, it seems, all the time, either a live event or a master class of some kind, or a course that you created. So what do you have going on these days that's right here, right now? And then if somebody wants to find out more about what you've talked about, what's the best ways for them to do that?
Probably the best way to answer all those questions is just go to rayedwards.com. And there you'll find a bunch of free resources. We have links to the podcast, to the YouTube channel, to our social media accounts, which, by the way, just to touch on it, social media in itself is not evil. It's just a pipeline. And the question is, are we as believers in the kingdom, are we filling that pipeline with kingdom messages, or are we letting it be overrun by something else? That's the question we ought to be asking ourselves. And I don't mean judging and preaching and arguing with people. I mean loving on them, giving them light and joy and the hope of Christ. If we carry those messages, it's hard to argue with kindness and love.
There you go.
So, but go to rayedwards.com. You can find links to everything we're doing, and there's a lot of free stuff there, including you can get a copy of my book on writing copy that sells for free if you go to rayedwards.com/free book. That's probably one of the best places to start.
Awesome. All right. Hey, folks, hang around just a few minutes. John and I will be wrapping up in a minute. We're going to have some calls to action and takeaways from the things that Ray shared, and we'll be back with that in just a second.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.